Nobody looks at them a problem? Thanks for tuning in to tonight's edition of the Rensaw Report. Murray I reporting from the city, too tough to die. Two great guests tonight. John Scott from Groton, formerly a state rep, has joined us, and Ray Hacket, as always, on the first Thursday is here. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
My pleasure.
So, John, you were a legislature, a state rep from town of Groton, very active.
Yeah.
I could never believe that you got beat. And what happened?
Well, I blame it on Hillary Clinton. The presidential races, I think, is what got me. I lost by a little over 600 votes, and Hillary Clinton beat Trump in my district by a little over 600 votes. Groton is an unusual district because we have the Navy base and there's a lot of transient people, and I think there was a lot of new face base, and no matter how much marketing I might have done to let them know who I was, they were coming out to vote for president, and they didn't know who I was over the town's dog catcher, and just they voted for Hillary, and they stayed on the deal.
The military, you think, voted for Hillary?
Yeah, I think so, because my biggest district includes the Navy housing, and that was one of the hardest hits. Was the Navy base.
Are you saying that people didn't split their votes?
I think there were a lot of people who just didn't know me. There in any of these presidential years, especially when we have a year where we have the opportunity to elect a brand new president because somebody's timed out. There are people who just come out and they don't really know about anybody else but the president. They only vote for president every 4 years. They don't know me. They don't know Heather Summers. They don't know who they're running. Any of the local races that might be running at the time. So they're going to vote their choice and just stay on that line. And I think that's what happened to me in Groton.
So do you hope to get back involved? Are you still involved? Or?
I'm still involved. I'm working from the sidelines in a couple of things. I've got some bills that had been put in while I was up there. It's nice to actually have a senator in my side of the river that's functional. And Heather Summers is doing an excellent job. She's getting a lot of good press. And she and I talked, and she resurrected some of the bills that I had put in that were supportive of some economic development initiatives and things like that. So I wish I'd had that when I was up there, someone like Heather to work with. With Andy Maynard having had that accident, there was just no assistance coming from the Senate floor. So I think that she'll be able to do a lot for Groton, and I wish I was able to work with her.
So far, there seems to be a spirit of cooperation, Ray, in the newly elected representatives.
Yeah, there is. Senate, I think. You see it more so because, you got Fasano and Looney are, these two guys have known each other for 40 years. They're both lawyers. They're both out of the New Haven area. They have great respect for each other. Politically, they differ on a number of different things. But I think I said this last month when we were on the show here, that the simple fact that they came up with a reasonable solution as to what to do with this 18-18 tie, which is now a 17 tie, was that they would share the responsibility together. And that hadn't been done before, and it certainly, I think, bode well. Now, we had our first big showdown yesterday with Malloy's plan on the pension reform issue.
Great refinancing deal.
Yeah, it is it's really not reform, but and it broke along party lines. And Nancy Wyman, the lieutenant governor, had to come in and break the tie in the Senate. You're still going to have that, but I do believe that there is a greater sense of cooperation and spirit. Unfortunately, we're going to have to capitalize that on this year, because come next year, we're in a whole new different ballgame again. We're up for elections, and it's going to get partisan again.
Right. Well, Keith Panouf from the Connecticut Mirror,
yep,
as we spoke earlier, and he said simply the bill is coming due in an ever-increasing amount for an 80-year failure of Connecticut state representatives to deal with the fiscal problems in the state of Connecticut. 80 years. We can't blame everything on Roland.
No.
The plan that Governor Malloy has proposed, please, can you explain it to us, Ray? Because this is the first paragraph of this report, and he's a reliable, reputable.
He's one of the best budget reporters the state's got.
No question.
The cost of paying down $50 billion in unfunded retirement benefits. Plus, other state debt is eating a growing portion of the budget, squeezing funding for transportation, education, social services, and perhaps next, state aid for municipalities, which, if you're in a city like New London, is dependent on state aid.
All the towns are really dependent. Groton is just as dependent.
You know, John, Dan Stewart was on last week, and when they're doing their budget, they don't figure for anything coming from the state, and I like that feeling. Where the towns that I see, they do their budget and they're trying to guess what the state is going to give them. What is Molloy's plan really going to do, Ray? And do you see it as being?
Well, it's not bad, all right? And you know, basically, there's two ways to address a problem. One is you react to it. The other is you solve it. What we're seeing here now, I would say, is more of a reaction than it is a solution. But the bigger problem is, as Keith pointed out in his article here in the Connecticut Mirror, is that something needs to be done. And there are several things being done. Some of them are very, and some of them are basically just, you know, feel-good legislation. For example, there's several bills, at least a dozen of them right now, that want to change the way pensions are calculated. Right now, your pension as a state employee, and legislative pensions as well, is based on your highest earnings for the last 3 years. And that's where you see individuals putting in hours and hours of overtime during those last 3 years of.
But for legislators, we're not union, so there were lots of decisions that got made over the past few years. Health benefits was one of the things that happened over the last 2 years, where non-union employees, including legislators, had to pay more out of their paychecks for the state health plan. So one of the things that, you know, as a legislator, and we saw some abuses of it, Senator Crisco, for example, was a year in mileage. And
you know, to carry on John's point here is that there are non-union state workers and legislators who would be affected by this legislation.
Oh, so it's only going to affect the non-union guys?
Well, because you're absolutely right, because the other part, the union, I mean, this is negotiated, it has to be negotiated at the table. Here's the good news, the silver lining to this dark cloud that you brought up here, is that by the legislature finally taking some action, it sends that message. It makes it easier for the administration to sit down at the bargaining table. And you know, if non-union state workers, administrative people, appointees, et cetera, and legislators are going to have to take this hit, then that's a bargaining tool that can be used at the bargaining table and make it worthwhile. To go there. Molloy has a much stronger hand right now because of actions like this.
So if I was the guy collecting, or getting ready to retire, collecting as much overtime as I could, I'd tell you to drop dead if you asked me to give up.
But
that,
you're absolutely right.
If you're a union guy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you're a union guy, it doesn't matter. You can still, you know, those rules will still apply. But
until that contract is changed,
if they can renegotiate it, but it's you got years before that's going to happen. But you know, take this happens all the time with former legislators. I'm trying to think of some names here of people that have done this, but they essentially will work for the 15 years or 10 years as a legislator, and then they'll get a job. Alyssa Wright is a great example. I saw this happen right after I got elected. She lost her re-election to Andre Baumgartner. And then she was appointed to an $85,000 a year job working as some sort of legal analyst as an appointee to Governor Molloy.
Betsy Ritter, Commissioner on Aging. But again, the other point, this gets back to this idea of the cooperation that we see up there. Republicans have for a very, very long time complained about the fact that, you know, under state law, the Constitution, the legislature is supposed to approve contracts. If they don't act within 30 days, the contracts become automatic. Right. And the Democrats have refused for years to act on any contract, let them all become law. Republicans now have some pull in the General Assembly up there now, and if they're true to that particular complaint that they've had, they're going to force the legislature to actually vote on contracts. Well, now, if you're the unions, you really don't want the legislature voting. And again, all that does is it strengthens the bargaining position of the administration sitting down with the unions to try and get these concessions.
If yesterday's vote was any indication of the power the Republicans have, even with a tie vote, they're going to lose, because when the rubber hits the road
Again, we're reacting, we're not solving this problem, we're reacting to the problem, and that had to be done. There's no question about that. But they didn't come forth with a better plan or an alternate plan in that sense there. And if you're not going to do that, then you're absolutely right. You have no bite whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately was out of town when they were voting on this stuff, so I wasn't able to watch and pay attention to it. But essentially what's happened, to take the position that the Republicans are taking, they're refinancing the mortgage. So most people will take a 30-year mortgage and refinance it down to a 15-year so they can get done with the mortgage faster. But in Connecticut, we've taken that 15-year mortgage and refinanced it to a 30-year, and they'll save as a gimmick $500 million, so they'll have $500 extra million to probably recklessly spend in this budget cycle. But they have an $11 billion issue 20 or 30 years down the road. And that's have the answer on how to fix that. But there's got to be a better way than costing our kids $11 billion.
John, sometimes you got to look in the rearview mirror a little bit. Although I know it's unpopular to blame somebody, but there's plenty of blame to go around here. Those guys up there have not cut it. I'm sorry. Just the fact that they don't vote in that on the contracts is an indication and shows you what's happening in Hartford. As you mentioned, Ray, when they don't vote, it's automatically implemented. That's not good government.
It's not good government. And you think about I've served on the Groton Town Council, and when union contracts finish their negotiations, the town council goes into a special session to talk about it privately, and then we'll come out and vote on it. But all those union contracts always get vetted and voted on by the Groton Town. And I firmly believe that the same thing needs to happen in Hartford. And what's scary is that, and I've told this story somewhat facetiously, but a union contract could possibly have language in it that changes established Connecticut law. For example, a union contract might say, we're going to legalize marijuana. And so if that contract gets approved by the membership and approved by the Attorney General, it then goes on the clock of the legislature for the 30 days. And if 30 days goes by and nobody talks about it, we've just legalized marijuana by a union contract in the state of Connecticut.
That's a possibility, but
I'm stretching. That's never really going to happen. But I have seen circumstances where established law that had public hearings and debate on the House and Senate floors, got changed by a union contract with no discussion.
Yeah, the bottom line of this is the responsibility to negotiate the contract falls with the administration, a la the governor's office. That office there is responsible for negotiating the contract with the state employees and their unions. The legislature's role is to approve those contracts. So it's premature before the negotiations even get underway to decide what's going to be there and what isn't going to be there. You have to wait until that negotiation is completed. Malloy was very, very clear in January when he opened up the session that he's looking for concessions, but he wants those concessions from the negotiating table. And with the Republicans now having some say in Hartford and forcing the issue, because not all Democrats are going to, what we saw yesterday was not, I don't even want to say it's typical. It's going to happen where there's going to be party line votes on some issues. But not all Democrats are simply going to say, you know what, we don't want to look at the contracts. It's going to become an issue.
Well, how about the legislation that was proposed that required the lawmakers to vote on the contracts?
Yep. That was a party line vote?
And that was a party line vote. How'd that go?
Well, again, we're going to see some changes up there this year. And until those contracts are negotiated, and they are going to go looking for it, there are a lot of good discussions going on right now that haven't been going on for years about changes to the reform. Melissa Zero is trying to get some legislation that would increase the pension contribution of state workers. That's going to fly like a lead balloon in those negotiations, but that's on the table. You got the mileage and the overtime calculations on the table. But the bottom line was that, if nothing was done right now, I think it was a 2032, there's a $6 billion balloon payment. That's 1/3 of the budget. Yeah. And Keith's absolutely right. To take an $18 billion budget and carve out 1/3 of it just to pay a pension, your public safety, public health, prisons, municipal aid, all of those other programs, social service programs, they're all going to suffer.
Absolutely.
And so something had to be done. It's not the solution, but it's the beginning.
What do you see happening, John? Do you see progress being made at all?
I think the personnel, and she's been home caring for her spouse, and so she came in at the last second. But if she had missed that vote on the pension thing, the Republicans would have won, and it would have failed.
So with a $50 billion, and that doesn't include everything,
Right.
debt, wouldn't you say we're bankrupt?
I think if it was a business, like a newspaper or an insurance agency, yeah, we're bankrupt. But
Government can go bankrupt.
yeah.
Now, granted, municipalities have
Yeah.
gone bankrupt, exactly. But government, because it has taxing authority, technically can never go bankrupt.
Who's the lieutenant governor?
Nancy Wyman.
She was in that seat right there, Ray.
Yeah.
And I asked her that same question, and she scolded me and told me, don't you ever say Connecticut is bankrupt. As long as we can raise taxes,
Yep.
we're not bankrupt. I mean, come on.
Well, technically,
Tell me about the pensions, and are they in trouble? And how is that gonna work out for these teachers?
It is a long-standing problem for the teachers' pensions. It's underfunded. I think it's a similar situation to the pension situation they're working on on Wednesday. It's and again, I don't have an answer for that aspect of it, but it's a promise that have been made. There's problems with it, and we're gonna have to figure out a way to finance keeping that promise.
You mentioned marijuana before. It's a big issue. It's gonna
Yep.
be a big issue in this legislative session.
It's not. It's going to pass.
It is gonna pass?
Sure.
Probably will, and they're being blinded by the dollars.
Yes.
Yep. And that's what I've struggled with when I was up there. Is that they don't know how to cut spending, but they certainly know how to find ways to find more income, and then they spend it and they expand the government, and then 5 years from now they go, why are we broke again? Because they increased employees, which increased pension and health obligations, and they're not thinking forward when they make these decisions. And for a great example, another thing I think that'll probably happen, or at least grow some long legs, is tolls on our highways this year.
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm going to interrupt you there, except for one thing. I listened to Tony, his last name's eluding me right now.
D'Amelio?
Yeah, no, the chairman of the Transportation Committee, the Democrat. And anyway, he makes a very strong argument, and I think you will see tolls pass. What was never mentioned once in that entire conversation was the lockbox. To make sure that the money that's being look, the gasoline tax is insufficient to fund the transportation needs of this state. Cars are hybrids are going to take over automobiles,
Electric cars too.
and cars efficiencies are so good right now.
In Florida, I was just down there, and if you have a Sun Pass, you can breeze right through, but they still have the old-fashioned toll booth for the rest of us that don't have the pass.
But the Tappan Zee Bridge, I mean, if you don't have the Easy Pass, they just take a picture of your car and they send you the bill in the mail. That's what they're talking about doing here in Connecticut.
And they actually just implemented that in Massachusetts. They actually, over a long weekend, they ripped out all the toll booths, and they put up prior to ripping down the toll booths, they put up these stanchions over the highway that read your Easy Pass, and if you don't have an Easy Pass, they're catching a picture of your license plate. And they expect that there'll be some people they'll never get the money from, but the tolls will be collected with technology instead
Hey,
of
guys,
people.
we're gonna call on line one,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Thanks for calling you live.
Hi, Murray, thanks for taking my call. Ray, and I don't know the other gentleman, but good evening.
John.
Listen, isn't Social Security monies taxed so that the state would get some taxes for Social Security? Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the people who have earned their Social Security, if they work their 40 quarters, they're going to get a Social Security check when they retire. But if you had a second job and became a teacher, well, you can't collect, you do your teaching for 20 years, you get your pension from the teaching, but you can't collect Social Security. And if I'm right, I think teachers' unions, they're the only ones who can't get Social Security and their school pensions. Wouldn't it be advantageous to the state to let these people who have earned their Social Security to get both, and then the state would get tax money from that? I will hang up and listen. Thank you.
Excellent question.
Yeah, it's a good,
Thank
my
you.
understanding of the teacher's pension situation is paying into Social Security if they're eligible for the teacher's
So
pension
right.
program. So they wouldn't be
Why
eligible.
is that, John? Is the pension, does the pension compensate for not?
My understanding is that the pension is supposed to be as good as a Social Security check, and they're not paying in. I mean, they still need to save in other ways. It's not supposed to be their only retirement vehicle. They should have, other savings vehicles, but they don't pay into Social Security, and what they earn back from the program should be comparable to a Social Security check.
So am I interpreting his question correctly? He's saying that the teachers should be able to collect Social Security, and then the state would receive more tax revenues from that.
It's possible.
It's possible. I think we tax the teacher's pension too.
Yeah, the pensions are,
But
pensions are
what
taxed.
he's saying is if a teacher has a second job,
Well, yeah.
that he's contributing to Social Security, he's not allowed to collect it, just pension.
There's some complicated math behind the whole thing. The guy's right. If you're a teacher and you do work, 10 quarters in another job, or maybe you worked 10 quarters before you became a teacher, you have to make a decision. It's either Social Security or it's a teacher's pension, but
Is
you
that
can't have
state or federal legislation then?
It's state, because this all came about because Connecticut negotiated a deal with teachers so that they would not strike. We don't have teacher strikes here in Connecticut, strikes in other states. And part of the deal in giving up the right to strike is the pension issue. And it's a very good pension. It's, we've talked about this before. I remember when I first came to Connecticut 30 years ago, the Bulletin was running full-page ads begging people to come and be corrections officers. They couldn't offer them a good salary, so what they offered them was these wonderful benefits. Now, I mean, that was the times, and there was a solution, a problem in that regard there. But the times have changed. The problem is we now have to go on back and rethink some of these things. But the bottom line is that these are promises that are made, that promises have to be kept. We have to go moving forward. And my feeling is that we spend too much time trying to point fingers at who's responsible for all of this instead of and reacting to problems instead of trying to find real solutions to the problems.
Geez, I disagree with you, Ray.
Okay.
I think we should, the people who are responsible for
up and get a higher pay. So she was able to earn a higher pension based on, achieving higher levels of public office. But there are, like we talked about before, people that have been state representatives for a period of time will retire, I'll put that in quotes, and take a position. Who were the guys in the Senate that did that? There was, what was the, one senator is taking an auditor's position. It was a
Yeah,
Republican.
with a Republican and
With
then
the
a
state of
Democrat.
Connecticut?
Yeah.
That's
So
good,
he's
good
going from a
duty.
$28,000 a year job to like a $1,000 job, and he's been there long enough to get his pension. So he's going to be there for 3 or 4 years and increase the math on what he'll earn.
And you'll disagree with me on this one, so feel free to do that too. But let's stop and look at this realistically. How many CEOs in business do you know that have an $18 billion a year business earning $150,000 a year? Because that's what we pay the governor of this state. He's the CEO of an $18 billion a year.
So you suggesting we should give them more money?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm
Not
suggesting,
more,
what I'm suggesting here is that we need to find real solutions to
Look,
the
Ray,
problems that we're facing.
Dan Malloy, you've interviewed him, and
I've known Dan for 10 years, yes, yeah.
And he's a nice guy.
Yep.
But
They're all nice
he
guys.
knew exactly the state of the Connecticut when he they want
Yes.
the job, and thank God somebody wants these jobs,
Right.
because not many of us take them. But the fact is, he knew what he was getting into.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't cut the mustard in 8 years. Let's face it.
Well,
All of a sudden, in the 11th hour now, 2 years before he's going to, God, I hope he's not going to run again. But
he might.
He could. There's nothing to stop him.
all of a sudden, he comes up with some ideas now.
No. He's actually had some of these ideas for the last 6 years. His relationship with the Democratic-controlled legislature has not been a bed of roses.
That's true.
These last 6 years. He has had to fight with them left and right. I mean, the real problem has been, more focused on the legislature. But you're right. There's enough blame to go around for everybody there.
Now, that's the Ray Hackett I like.
But at the same time, it's campaign governing is difficult. You know, but I think, you know, I'd probably feel more optimistic about this legislative session than I have in the last 20 years, because I do believe the tone has changed up there,
absolutely.
the personalities have changed up there, and the reality is finally
Well,
settling
As
in.
Andrea Stillman mentioned many, many times, the devil's in the details.
Of course.
And we'll see how it's going to work out. And certainly, it hasn't worked out well for the Connecticut taxpayers, so.
Well, you know, just to build on what Ray is saying here, the personality is very different. You know, the fact that in the House there's that four-person gap. You know, the Democrats used to really run a lot of control over their members. You know, they're not allowed to speak. You know, that was the one sad thing about Groton losing both of its Republican members, is that I could get up at any point and speak on the House floor on a bill, or speak in the committee rooms on a bill. But the Democrats are really controlled, and they're told to sit and stay quiet unless you're spoken to, and they really just don't let them do much without leadership giving them permission. That atmosphere may change, because there's a number of people who could just say, you know what, I don't have to listen to you, and they might vote with the Republicans on a few things. There have been members of the Democratic caucus they've allowed to vote with us on bills over the last several years. With numbers being so tight and the possibility of someone being absent, it'll be interesting to see how those negotiations go.
When they tell them just sit over in the corner and not say anything, are they somebody suggesting that to them? Certainly it can't be.
They control them. It's interesting to watch. They control them with threats of taking away things like parking places, or a nice office, or staff support. Or
Peters, when she challenged Kevin Sullivan for President Pro Tem of the Senate, she lost. She didn't have the votes. And I jokingly say they moved her office to the garage.
Yep.
And that's where she spent her final year in there. Shawn Johnson, I think, is probably one of the best examples of a legislator who didn't play the party rule. And he suffered greatly for it. In terms of the politics and just, you know, gimme. It passed the House 150-1. Shawn Johnson, who stood up and simply spoke his mind and said, this is wrong. You know, we have a financial crisis here, and you have just broken out the credit card for every member of this House.
Yep.
And guess what? Every member of the House got something except Shawn.
Yeah. I saw an example of that in the first year I was up there. You know, there was the night that we were till 6 in the morning voting on the budget, and Representative Nicastro, who sits behind me, he's a Democrat, and he was a colorful guy, and I can't say the exact words because we were on public access television, but it involved an F-bomb, but they don't own me, he said. And you know, he was going to vote with us on the budget. Well, 4 hours later, they had him,
Yep.
and he voted with them. And the whips walking around that room, they're like, you know, the Gestapo with guns on their belt, you know, if you don't vote with
And to be fair, it's not just the bad Democrats. If the Republicans were in charge, they'd be doing the exact same
perhaps.
thing. You know,
It's about we're constitutionally controlled with a time clock. So you know, the session started the first Wednesday of January. It's going to end the first Wednesday in June, and you know, anything that they don't get done by midnight of the first Wednesday in June is dead and has to start over. So they either got to call them in for a special session, which opens up an incredible can of worms for all kinds of ugliness to happen, or they wait.
Of being the last one to come out of a recession. And this one here has been extraordinarily longer and more painful than past recessions in the past. I think what we have, I wouldn't use the word crisis per se myself. I think we have some financial difficulties. We need to do a better job of budgeting. And part of the problems that we have is not so much the fact that we spend too much, is, in my humble opinion, the projected estimates of revenue coming in are inflated to cover, because they have to pass a balanced budget. So if you're going to spend $18 billion, you need to show $18 billion worth of income. Well, sometimes, you know, that $18 billion is really only $17 billion, which is why you end up with a $1 billion deficit.
They actually used a Yale study that said that we would have 8% economic growth in the state of Connecticut, and we weren't even.
Great.
But they had to use a number, and they decided that Yale would be that entity that no one would distrust, and so That's what and they ended up being short.
So the issue really isn't, and I love the phrase where everyone says, we have a spending problem here in Connecticut, we don't have a revenue problem. What we have here is a reality problem.
Right.
In the fact that
Well-
we need to be more realistic about where we really are, and then we don't have to be reactionary, we can start being
How
solvers.
about exorbitant pensions that some people are collecting on behalf of the state of Connecticut as identified by the Sunshine Fund or whatever it is that?
Well, those are promises
No,
made.
Ray,
We can't fix that.
You can't tell me that they did right by the taxpayer by giving those people that type of money, plus insurance, plus health benefits?
Again, go on back to looking where we were
Right.
when those promises were made, where we were literally begging people to join government.
That was a long, long time ago, my friend.
Well, I'll tell you, once you get it in the contract, getting it out is a lot
I'll
harder.
tell you, they have changed things. So, there was a lot of talk with Andy Maynard having had his accident about, give him those 2 more years he needs so that he could
Have his health
have
care
his
bill.
health benefits and his pension, because he needed 2 more years to
Yeah.
get that. But when I started 2 years ago, when I started, the rules are different for me. I had to serve years to get the pension and 15 to get the health insurance. So they've done what they could over the period of time, and they've also redefined. Like, I think I was tier 3 pension. So, if I had survived the 10 years of time and continued, and based on however long I had served, I might go home with a $4,000 a year pension if I did nothing else besides be a state representative doing my 28 plus whatever mileage I got. And the health insurance piece, I think, is probably even more dangerous than the pension because of how they, what those benefits are and what they do. I mean, as a retiree of the state of Connecticut, if you're under age 65, you get to stay on the health plan and enjoy all the same benefits that you got while you were an employee. But when you turn age 65, you still continue to be on the health plan. And for those of us, for those people that are over 5 and are being charged for Medicare, it's roughly $200 a month they have to pay for Medicare out of their Social Security checks. The state of Connecticut will send you a check every month for that $200 you're paying, on top of giving you the health insurance. So you get to continue on this Bentley of a health plan. It's not even a Cadillac, it's a Bentley, for the rest of your life. And the state of Connecticut will even pay for those pieces that you should be paying for yourself.
John, I'm sorry that we can't,
Stimulating.
but here's,
Stimulating talk.
Yes.
what,
Listen, but here's the bottom line, that, again, these were negotiated contracts, and until those are changed at the negotiating table, yeah, I mean, I understand, good intentions 30, 40 years ago aren't working as well today. No one's talking about raising taxes, and I do believe that when you see the governor's budget coming out next week from now, February 8th, I guess, is when he's going to release his budget, you might see some increase in the sin taxes, the cigarette tax, the alcohol tax, et cetera. But, you're not going to see any increase in income taxes or et cetera. You might see some fees going on up. But what you are going to see, the revenue that they're going after now, and this, I think, quite frankly, I find embarrassing myself, but we'll have a 3rd casino. We'll have legalized marijuana. We're going to allow sports fantasy betting in this state. We're going to tax that on the winnings, et cetera. The only new taxes that are going to come out of that budget are something new like that. Like Keno. I mean, again, still get someone to admit that they're the ones who actually put that Keno bill, into the legislation in the first place. No one will, they still deny it. I had nothing to do with it. We now have Keno. Like I said, we're going to get another casino. We're going to legalize marijuana. We're going to tax that, and et cetera. The problem is not taxes. The problem is not spending. The problem is dealing with the reality.
Right. But what they'll do is they won't project the revenues correctly.
That's what I mean.
One of the we did several budget mitigations over the last 2 years. And I was saying with a tongue-in-cheek comment that in this last budget mitigation, we hope that everybody will smoke more cigarettes, drink more alcohol, gamble more, and the Attorney General hopefully will settle about $40 million worth of lawsuits that he's got pending. And these are all things that we really can't control because hopefully people are quitting smoking. And, we just don't know if people have enough money around here to go gamble. But, it's not stuff, they make these projections and then we don't meet them. And then we end up having another mitigations to solve a revenue shortfall.
Here's the irony of the whole thing, in my opinion. We have a group up there, 80 some odd legislators, they call the Appropriations Committee, whose only job is to spend money. Mm-hmm. And then you have another 80 group of different legislators up there, they call the Revenue Committee, and their only job is to make money. They don't talk. I mean, Paul Formica was here,
right.
And made, sent that, I don't know, to the two committee chairmen, say, why don't you get a subcommittee and you guys kind of like meet on a regular basis so that you can talk. They don't talk. Again, the problem here is facing reality. And reality is we have some very major challenges facing this state. And we have to stop playing the games. And I think, particularly this year and last year as well, in both of his addresses to the legislature, the governor laid down very, that we have to start thinking differently about the way we govern. The legislature, prior to last year's election, ignored him. They can't ignore him a second time because things have changed.
I thought a very positive thought that came out of the governor's office from Governor Malloy was his suggestion, and as a matter of fact, it was headlined someplace that Malloy proposes a financial oversight board to monitor
legislation that tends to come from Hartford to tell us as a municipality how we're supposed to operate. But yet I think there's a lot of towns, especially here in eastern Connecticut, that do a pretty darn good job of running their finances. I think Groton in particular with our RTM and town council form of government.
Wait a minute, John. You got 6 fire departments
Well,
that have to be fired. I don't know how you can say they do a good job.
You got the town of Groton. I mean, there are. I mean, we're not perfect.
From what I read,
but because City of Groton, which can be its own independent train wreck,
yeah.
And there's a lot of negotiations that have been going back and forth. But if you just look solely at the town of Groton, and the town of Groton is what's responsible for taking in those grants from the state of Connecticut. I think we've done a pretty good job over the years of managing our finances and constantly watching those spending items. But there's some frustrations. I mean, there's laws that come down from Hartford that basically tell a municipality that we can't cut a Board of Education budget.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about education and how big a bite that's taken out of the budget. And they say every town it's 60, maybe even a little more percent.
It's 60 to 70% depending on the town.
Yeah.
That's out of sight too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's challenges that come with that depending on what town. I mean, Groton is unique in the sense that we have the military families and we don't get tax revenue from the military base housing. We get some federal tax dollars, but it's nowhere near enough to make up for what the value of each independent military house would have been worth if we had to issue a tax bill to it.
I think the bigger issue, and you touched on it very briefly, was the mandatory minimum requirement.
Right.
That you are not allowed, if you're a municipality, you are not allowed to spend $1 less on education next year that you spent this year.
Right.
Even if your enrollment is falling 10 or 15.
And I think that was pushed through by the Democrats.
And
there's-
But back to this thing, the oversight, if I can very briefly. I haven't seen all the details on this one, and as we've always said, the devil is in the detail. This is aimed at Hartford.
Yeah.
All right?
Hey, they're broke, Hartford. Huh?
They're on the verge of bankruptcy. Yes, they are. I mean, they got some real serious problems up there at Hartford. But that's what this whole oversight thing is really aimed at. And unfortunately, as you said, there are going to be some towns who are going to take issue with this idea of being oversight.
Right.
And that, and quite frankly, reality sets in. Can Connecticut do well if its capital city is bankrupt? No, it can't. I mean, that's,
Well, listen,
it becomes the weight that drags down the rest of the
they made
state.
some pretty stupid decisions in Hartford. One baseball stadium
park was the
that
biggest one.
they paid 2 or 3 times for. It's a function of the leadership that they've had through the years, and they're certainly not elected because of their intelligence.
Well, the leadership that's responsible for those type of ideas is now all gone. Again, there's new leadership in there. The people have spoken, and Brolin, and I don't know him that well. I know a little bit about. He, like Malloy, he knew what he was inheriting when he went after that job, and he won, and now he has to deal with it. And he's trying to deal with it, but he's discovered it's bigger and worse off than what he thought. He needs help. And that's what this whole thing behind the oversight is. And you know what? And I don't think, again, until we see all the details behind it, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other on this. But again, hearkening back to Beloit's initial speech in January, where he said that what needs to be done is we need to rethink the way we fund municipalities.
Okay, that's a good point. We only have a
Okay.
little bit of time left.
Yeah.
But that's an example of the problem that they have in New London. 50% of the properties are non-taxable. The pilot funds, as reported by the Hartford Current years ago, are not kicking in enough money to make up for the lack of paying, non-payment of taxes.
Right.
The educational cost share is way out of whack and needs to be somehow be reformulated. But it's not going to happen. And you said there's not going to be any new taxes. I'll guarantee you that our funds are going to be cut from Hartford, and that's going to mean a direct increase in our property taxes. So saying that we're not going to have any taxes, I think you're off base a little bit.
What I said was, let's quote me correctly if you don't mind. What I said was, you're not going to see any new taxes proposed in Malloy's budget.
Right.
So yeah, there is going to be that trickle-down effect, no question about it. But again, that gets back to the other issue about the municipal leaders needing to have some responsibility and looking internally at their own operations. I mean, you know, there's a lot that can be done on all levels of government. And somewhere along the lines, you've got to start dealing with some of these issues.
John, knowing what you know, are you optimistic about the future of the state of Connecticut?
Yeah, I think that, with the fact that the Republican numbers are growing, I think there is the potential for some good negotiations and some good change.
Well, look at, one thing that will bring tax dollars is industry and jobs.
Yep.
Connecticut is not really known as being a friendly state to be in business. Matter of fact, I don't think they want you to be in business here.
Well, wait a second. We got how many new workers is EB going to hire this year?
Well, they're, but remember, there's going to be a downturn before there's an upturn.
I understand that. And then you got, so they're going to be here for another 20 years. I still think
Prudential is moving.
I still think the real game changer that we haven't seen yet that's coming, and we probably will see it, hopefully within the next 3 to 5 years, is the biotech at Dempsey Hospital.
Perhaps. We need,
That's going to be a
you
game
talk
changer.
about EB and Sikorsky, and God bless us for having those jobs. Those are government subsidized jobs, but we need small business in
Yes.
your newspaper and other your small business. We need small business to be able to come to the area and develop and thrive, and that's hard. And under the current climate that we're in.
John, you're an insurance guy. You know all about that stuff. Have you ever thought about the cost of workers' comp to a small business in the state of Connecticut?
Oh, yeah, it's expensive depending on what you do.
It's mind-boggling,
Yeah.
and make the Super Bowl. Ray, you're a big sports fan.
Yeah.
I believe Tom Brady was framed. I can't wait to see him. I hope he spits in his face when he goes to give him that trophy.
Like, make sure he doesn't jump off his chair with this one. The cheating Patriots hired a kid to go turn on the alarms at the hotel.
Oh, boy. Who are you picking? Really?
Yeah.
Wow. John, how about you?
I'm picking Budweiser to have the best ad on TV this year.
And Lady Gaga's show.
Lady Gaga's going to be hanging 250 feet in the air. John Scott, thank you for
Thank you for
taking the
having
time
me.
to come on. Hope you can do it again sometime, Ray.
Absolutely.
As usual, listen,
Always a pleasure.
be prepared for Tuesday because your fans got 2 days to catch up with you. Murray, signing off from the city. Too rough to die.